Martha Manning, eldest child in a devout Irish Catholic family, wrote in her memoir, Chasing Grace, "I wish there were an installment plan for grace, so I would know that I was definitely going to get my monthly allotment, no matter what. But it never works like that. I'm never clear on whether it's grace that comes and goes, or whether it's my ability to experience it that varies so much. It seems like I'm always tearing after it, afraid I'll never catch it, or if I do, that there won't be enough." Manning grew up with a traditional definition of grace. There's not much of it out there. It's catch as catch can, whether we receive any of it or not. And it's not clear whether we humans can do anything that will put us in just the right position to receive that bit of grace. Although grace may be mysterious, I think there are things that we can do to increase our chances of experiencing grace. I believe we can practice grace. I'm more inclined toward Ramakrishna's statement, "The winds of grace are always blowing, but you have to raise the sail." Well, how do we raise the sail? There's a physicality to grace, which I hope you experienced a little bit during the spoken meditation when we went from closed fist to open palms. Here's another way to think about it. Has anyone in this room ever experienced stress? Like ever in your life experienced stress? Okay, a few of us. Think for a moment about what stress feels like in your body. What does your body feel like when you're under stress? And just call out a word that describes what your body feels when you're under stress. And if I can hear you, I'll repeat it into the microphone. Tight, tense. Shallow breathing. It is hard to hear. Heart racing. Anxious. Anything else? Some people feel it in their stomach, headache, closed. So now think for a moment when you have had an experience that you would consider the opposite of stress, the opposite of stress. Bring to mind an experience you've had that's the opposite of stress. And what does it feel like in your body when you're experiencing the opposite of stress? Relaxed, calm, warm. Shoulders down, peaceful, happy, deep breathing, hopeful, smiling, at ease. So that experience in our bodies of the opposite of stress is what my interplay mentors call grace, the physicality of grace. Once we identify those physical sensations of grace in our bodies, we become able to notice over time that they tend to occur for us in some places more than others, or with some people more than others, or during certain activities more than others. Take a moment to think to yourself about when and where you experience the opposite of stress. Where are you? What are you doing or not doing? And who are you with? If we notice when and where grace is happening for us, we can choose to go to those places or be with those people or do those activities more often. We can choose to put ourselves in the path of grace. Annie Dillard wrote in her book, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, "The literature of illumination reveals this most of all. Although it comes to those who wait for it, it is always, even to the most practiced and adept, a gift and a total surprise. I return from one walk, knowing where the killdeer nests in the field by the creek, and the hour the laurel blooms. I return from the same walk a day later, scarcely knowing my own name. I cannot cause light. The most I can do is try to put myself in the path of its beam. It takes practice to do that, though, in order to catch the winds of grace, to put ourselves in the path of its beam. It helps to slow down and go the speed of the body. Notice what creates grace for you. Then make space to do those things as often as you can. Just as we can identify stress and what causes it, we can recognize the experience of grace and then choose to seek that more often. Some people keep a gratitude journal. When they wake up in the morning, they write down 3 things they're grateful for. And when they go to sleep at night, they write down 3 things they're grateful for that happened that day. Over time, this spiritual practice helps people notice more and more things to be grateful for. That practice opens their senses and suffuses their living with gratitude. I wonder if we could keep a grace journal. Write down each day when you experienced a physical sensation that was the opposite of stress. We're so conditioned to be noticing stress. Let's keep track of when we have the opposite of stress. Write down what you were doing or not doing when that happened. Write down where you were, who you were with, or were you by yourself? Over time, you'll see a pattern as you look back in your grace journal. You'll notice those people, places, and activities that create grace for you, and you'll recognize them as your grace makers. That will come into your language. You'll say, I want to go by my grace maker today. Jim Gunchinen says, grace is as physically contagious as stress. When you live your grace physically, others get it from you. Each body has a unique way of moving and being. Different things create grace for different people. Freedom to be filled by what moves us is grace's trademark. Phil Porter says, I notice that I receive grace through the actions of others. So I assume then that I too can be an agent of grace. What could I be doing in my everyday life that would increase the amount of grace in the world? Here at First Church, we are committed to becoming an anti-racist community. And I believe that grace is a key to our transformation. Many of us are aware that in the larger society, and thereby in our families and in our congregation, We are influenced by white supremacy culture, even when we can't see it. The concept of whiteness and the idea that white people are better than others is so prevalent in American society. It's the water we swim in. Here at First Church, we're learning to be aware of this and work to transform it. On my anti-racist learning journey, I was amazed and delighted that someone has named characteristics of white supremacy culture and also antidotes that people can use for individual and communal transformation. Naming is often the first step to growing awareness. In 1999, organizational thinker and anti-racism teacher Tema Okun published an article that named 15 characteristics of white supremacy culture and identified associated actions, approaches, behaviors that we can practice to undo this harmful way of relating. Okun says, these characteristics are not meant to describe all white people. They are meant to describe the norms of white supremacy culture, of white middle class and owning class culture, a culture we are all required to navigate regardless of our multiple identities. Okun names 15 characteristics, but today I'm only going to talk about 3 of them that I think may be most accessible and available to the practice of grace. They are perfectionism, sense of urgency, and either-or thinking. Before I give you Okun's descriptions, I invite you to just take a moment to bring to mind your own workplace, excuse me, perhaps a volunteer team or another group that you belong to. When I describe these characteristics, think about that group that you brought to mind and if any of these apply. If you don't have a group, think about whether these apply to you as an individual. Okun describes perfectionism as little appreciation expressed for others' work. And remember, she's talking about groups. Perfectionism, you find criticism to be more common. Criticism of the person or their work in their absence is more common. And mistakes are seen as personal failings. Antidotes to perfectionism include developing a culture of appreciation. Develop a learning organization where it is expected that everyone makes mistakes, and those mistakes offer opportunities for learning. To give an example, under Reverend Jennifer's leadership, a few years ago at our weekly staff meetings, we began the practice of naming an appreciation for someone else's work. Because white supremacy culture is the water we swim in, even here at First Church, we can become seduced by perfectionism, quick to criticize others, especially when we're under stress to produce an excellent product. So our weekly practice is to go around the circle of staff members, and after each person says what tasks they're working on this week so we all know what each other's working on, we name an appreciation. By the end of the meeting, we have 10 or 12 appreciations verbalized, as many as there are people in the room. And this creates a glow of goodwill so that when we inevitably make mistakes, it's easier to give each other grace. It's easier to be in a learning environment. The sense of urgency characteristic includes a continued sense of little time that undermines democratic and thoughtful decision-making. Sacrifice of potential allies in favor of quick or highly visible results. Reinforced by funding proposals that promise too much for too little. Antidotes to a sense of urgency include realistic work plans. Now there's an idea. Leadership that understands things take longer than anyone ever expects. At church, we call this going the speed of church. Writing realistic funding proposals. Either-or thinking characteristic includes things are either or, good or bad, right or wrong, with us or against us. There's no sense that things can be both and. There's an oversimplification of complex things. There's an increased sense of urgency that we must do this or that without time to consider a middle way. Antidotes to either-or thinking include, when you hear people use either-or language, just take a moment and suggest there might be more than two alternatives. When people oversimplify complex issues, encourage a deeper analysis. With urgent decisions, make sure people have time to think creatively. Is it really urgent? On her website, Oken emphasizes that the list of white supremacy culture characteristics is not to be used as a weapon. It is a reflective tool to help us notice where we're getting in our own way, to help us learn. For example, she says there's plenty of situations where urgency is called for. I'm looking at a retired nurse right now. Like, yeah, we know there are situations where we need to make urgent decisions. However, if it becomes so much of our pattern, urgency is seen as the best choice all the time. That can go to our detriment. If you notice any of these characteristics in yourself as an individual or the group that you brought to mind, know that there is help. There are these antidotes. We can learn to notice when these characteristics are active in our communities and practice the antidotes. We can create communities in which it's okay to make mistakes, learn from them, and then open to grace in each other. We can practice grace, even with the hard stuff. We can start using grace language by saying, perhaps when we need more time to get something done, I need you to give me some grace around this. Or when a deadline is adjusted for us, thank you for giving me grace around this. When we have something to offer, but it's not perfect, we offer it anyway. Perhaps we say, here's what I've got. Please give me some grace. At least it's a place to start. Practicing grace in groups could mean we say to each other, could we please slow down and just take a deep breath before we make this decision? Let's think past the either-or options on the table. Let's offer each other grace to find a third way. In her book, Writing to Wake the Soul, Karen Herring writes about the middle voice as a way of participating in grace. She said, long ago, a verb tense wholly lost to us today was neither active nor passive, but described events as happening of themselves while in collaboration by those affected by them. The middle voice was used in Sanskrit, Greek, and Indo-Persian. Christopher Bamford says the closest we might come to this in today's English would be to say, it thinks in me, or it acts in me. He notes that the meaning of this verb tense was lost as the individual will and ego emerged in ancient Greece and as agency became prized over receptivity. Herring continues, though we have lost the grammar to express the participatory nature of grace, we can still experience it. The middle voice of grace that moves us while moving in us and through us is both active and passive. When we receive grace, we also become its instruments, unfurling it further into the world. Theologian Catherine Keller suggests this is the meaning of the one-sentence parable Jesus told about yeast. The kingdom of heaven, Jesus said, is like yeast that a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour until all of it was leavened. Grace works like the yeast, a small organism with the enormous ability to make dough rise, but only with the participation and added effort of a bread maker willing to knead the dough. Any bread maker knows we must approach the yeast, water, and flour with humility. There is no guarantee the dough will rise or rise enough. There's no guarantee the bread will bake well or taste good. We approach with humility and we work the dough. The same with life and grace. Humility is part of practicing grace. Not self-lacerating humility, no. Balanced humility. Humility where we're aware that we know that we don't know. We know we are imperfect. We show up and offer what we can. We open ourselves to the unknown and allow ourselves to receive it and work with it. We allow grace to move in us and through us. We invite grace to think in us and act in us. We don't take credit for everything. We know there's more going on. We know that we are being leavened. The more we open ourselves to the possibility of receiving grace, the more we notice it in the world around us and feel able to give grace to ourselves and others. How do we open ourselves to grace? It takes practice. Grace is a paradox, ordinary yet mysterious, available yet unpredictable, beyond us yet within us. May we be open to and practice grace. May grace find us. May it be so.